welcome to the Libs of TikTok experience. I have with me here today Dennis Hannon. Dennis is a dad. You may have heard his story last week. It was all over the news. He's a dad out of New York, and the courts ruled that he cannot have a say in his young son's medical treatment. So they gave the boy's mom the only say for his medical treatment, and she decided that he is transgender and should go on puberty blockers, and Dennis was not allowed to be involved in that at all. So we have Dennis here today who's going to share with us his story. So welcome, Dennis.
Jaya, thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity to spread awareness and share this story. First and foremost, my goal in being here is to provide exposure. I think that true change starts with exposure. And if I have to be the first boot to drop on something like this happening so that it sparks true reform and change, then so be it. So you pretty much nailed it right away. I've been dealing with this for a while. If you'd like, I could start at the beginning as to how I found out about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, I know this story must have been extremely difficult for you and traumatic. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing it. And I agree with you 100%. The way that we make real change is to just keep raising awareness about it. So I appreciate your forthrightness and your willingness to share your story. So yeah, I think we should get right into it. So you have a young son, and walk us through what happened. How old is he? Let's start at the beginning.
Sure. So I found out about this when my son was about 5 years old. He was in kindergarten, and I was not receiving any mail or notifications from his school. So I contacted his school. There was an issue with the parent portal. We got that resolved. Some time went by, and I got a letter in the mail, and it was his report card, and it was addressed to the parent or guardian of Ruby Rose Hannon. Now, I didn't recognize the name Ruby Rose. That is not my son's name. I thought that maybe they had the wrong child on the letterhead, but the address was correct. So I opened it up, and that was probably one of the worst days in my life. I realized that my son was assigned a female name, Ruby Rose. I had never heard this name before. And they referred to my son exclusively using female pronouns, she, her. Essentially, I was the last to know. And at the time, I was going through a divorce. Through court discovery and proceedings, I realized that that was really just the tip of the iceberg.
So you have a 5-year-old son, and the way that you find out that he is identifying as trans is from the kindergarten teacher reaching out to you and identifying him as a different name.
Yes, ma'am. It was a report card.
Wow. That what are you feeling then? I mean, I can't imagine that, you have a son and then all of a sudden you're like, he's trans. The school is the one telling you.
I felt crushed. I was essentially the last to know, and I felt crushed for many reasons. I felt betrayed for one, but for two, my son never gave and still doesn't give any indication that there's any kind of gender confusion whatsoever. My son, a normal little boy, I never had any indication, no signs whatsoever. But I think really what made this so crushing was that it wasn't that they were notifying me that he had gender dysphoria. It was already after the fact. They had already socially transitioned my son without my knowledge or consent. They didn't even bother to ask if maybe I wanted to be a part of that, or if I knew, or I was essentially the last to know. And
So by
it just
socially
crushed my soul.
transition, yeah. By socially transition, you mean like your son is wearing dresses to school, has a girl's name, being referred to as she.
Yes, hair done up, makeup, female clothing, accessories, every accoutrement you can think of. If you looked at him during that time, you would have thought that he was a little girl. And just to clarify, when I was picking him up at the time, I only had supervised visits in the early stages of divorce. So I would only have him for 2 hours Tuesday and 2 hours Thursday every week. And most of that time was spent commuting. But when I was picking him up, when he was in my care, he was a boy. He was a boy named Matthew. But when he was in his mother's care and when he was going to school, he was a girl named Ruby.
Wow. So when you were with him, you saw no signs that he might be a girl. He's a regular, normal 5-year-old boy.
Correct. There was no indication whatsoever. There were no signs. I had no reason to question it. And looking back too, it just tells me how much they normalized this for him because he never gave any indication that his name was different at his mother's house. Or that lifestyle was such a contrast, and he was essentially living a double life.
He's living a second identity while he's at school and with his mom.
Yes.
So you find out, you get the report card in the mail, and you suddenly realize that your son is being transitioned into a girl. Tell us what happened next.
So through court proceedings in discovery, we discovered that at about age 2 to 3, he was going to a therapist by the name of Andrea Binner. And Andrea Binner is in Buffalo, and she's a self-proclaimed transgender therapist that specializes in adolescents, and she does gender-affirming therapy. Now, Andrea Binner never kept any notes at all on any therapy sessions that she had with my child. It came out that she not only did she not follow the WPATH standards for transgender care, but my son never, and still hasn't, had any formal diagnosis of gender dysphoria using the DSM-5 criteria. Now, what Binner did afterwards was at about 4 years old, she referred my son to a endocrinologist at the University of Rochester Pediatric Division by the name of Dr. Tran. I am not making that up. I know.
Wait, say that again.
If you don't laugh, you cry. So.
I'm sorry for laughing, but
no, it's totally. Yeah.
The doctor who your then 4-year-old son was seeing for gender dysphoria, and to get him started with gender affirming care. His or her, who is it? Is it a male or female?
Dr. Tran?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I've often wondered that myself. I have no idea.
Some kind of they, them, it, these, them, something.
Yeah.
The doctor's name is Dr. Tran, and Dr. Tran is going to trans your son.
Yes. Dr. Tran had 2 phone calls totaling 45 minutes with the mother only. They never spoke to my child. They never met my child. Yet over those 2 45-minute phone calls, they came to this conclusion that my son has gender dysphoria, and they recommended the potential for puberty blockers around the age 9.
And this is when your child is 4.
Yeah.
Okay, and you only found this out a few years later during discovery.
Right. It was all after the fact. I was the last to know. All of that had already happened.
So Dr. Tran had 2 phone calls, 45 minutes, with the boy's mother, and decided that your kid is transgender. This is a massive problem that we see across the mental health space, because when children want a sex change surgery, they need what's called a letter of readiness. And there are thousands of psychologists across the country who are lined up, and they will write a letter after 15 minutes of talking to you. So we have these, and every single case of detransition, and the cases where the detransitioners are actually suing the hospitals, we see this play out every single time. You have mental health counselors who barely even speak to the patient, giving them the go-ahead to start puberty blockers, to start sex change surgery. And it's just mind-boggling because they don't even know the story. 45 minutes later, your kid is approved for puberty blockers. I mean, how shocking is that?
They fast tracked my son to puberty blockers, and I had no idea. It still shocks me to this day that that could happen. And what's even more shocking is, to your point, now that I've come out about this and I've exposed what's going on, there's been a lot more people that have been reaching out to me. And it's both, it's nice to have somebody that can relate, but it's also horrifying to know that this isn't an isolated incident. And who, Lord knows how many other cases are out there that are just like mine and my son's that we don't know about.
For sure. And that's why you coming out and you sharing your story will, I think, really help others to come out and share their stories, because that, right, that's how we can have real change, is when more people share these horrific stories. Just to go back, to it. So you find out through discovery that your child was approved to start puberty blockers. You were not involved. What does the court say, about you not being involved? Did you have a say if you didn't want your kid to be on puberty blockers?
Yeah, so the first thing the courts did, and I went through several judges and several different, it started out in one county, went to another county, then it went to Supreme Court. There were many judges that left, came through here and there. But immediately the judge at the time awarded me sole medical authority. And all of these therapists just kind of went off into the sunset. I don't know what happened to them, but it's interesting how their word was considered to be the de facto standard. And then all of a sudden, when we started digging into it and realizing that, hey, there's no therapy notes, there's no none of this, there's no DSM-5, they just kind of disappeared and they were forgotten about. The courts ignored them. However, what the courts did still was, even without a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, knowing all of that was just premised on a big lie, they still ordered me to take my son to a psychosexual therapist, Psychosexual Health of Buffalo, where the treatments were $145 a session, sometimes once a week, fully out of pocket. No diagnosis has ever been made. So he went there for a year and a half. Me having sole medical authority at the time, I had to play ball. I was advised by my attorney that if I refused this, then I could lose custody, I could lose the case, because it would be deemed as I was interfering with essential medical treatment. So I played ball for a year and a half. Year and a half went by, didn't have any formal diagnosis still. So I did what any logical thinking parent would do. I reached out, I asked that he be discharged. The therapist refused to discharge him and then wrote a letter to the courts shortly after I lost my sole medical authority. It was only through speaking out and exposing these people and naming them by name that that therapist wanted nothing to do with my child again.
Taking your child for court mandated health screenings, essentially, and your child is doing great, living as a boy again, right?
Yep.
And you say, it's been a year and a half. I think we should end these sessions. And the therapist then goes and tells the court that you are basically harming your child, and then you are removed from sole medical authority.
Yeah, she refused. I had to tell her several times, please discharge my child. I have sole medical authority. I do not give you the right to see my child again.
So then the court ruled that you cannot have sole medical authority anymore. What happened after that?
It was, I had trial. I went to trial. I did my first news interview. I appeared a lot on Real America's Voice. I broke the news about this. And essentially, I was gag ordered by a Supreme Court judge. They had an order drawn up for contempt, and I was going to be thrown in jail for 30 days if I spoke again to any national media or anything like that. It was complete lawfare. I was punished. And ultimately, I knew that justice would never come through the justice system, because it wouldn't have taken three courts, ultimately Supreme Court, and then a trial over the course of 7 years to get it. I thought this was going to be open and shut, but no, they wanted to continue to drag this out because of the idea that he might be confused about his gender, which was all premised on a giant lie that was proven to be a lie.
So they threatened to throw you in prison for saying that your son is a boy and is not a girl.
Yes, for going on Real America's Voice and talking about this. And we're just the same kind of conversation that we're having here, just stating facts, things that have already been filed in the court. If I said anything that wasn't true, I would have been held in penalty of perjury, because everything that I'm saying here today is all in legal court filings.
I really get shocked because I've been doing this for 2.5 years and the stuff I see is just so insane. But this is actually insane. They want to throw you in jail for talking about the fact that your son is a boy and is not a girl.
Yes. And one of the reasons for that was because I used pictures of my son. And looking back, hindsight, I didn't cover up his face, and I should have, to protect his identity. And I fall on that. I own that. I accept that. But what I will say is that the pictures that were shown were all taken from her Facebook of my son being paraded around in public like beauty pageants, dressed in drag, giving drag queens shout outs on her Facebook so that she could virtue signal and climb up her social status ranks. However, when I used those same pictures to say, hey, look what's wrong with this, that was when I was punished.
From her public Facebook account.
Yep.
Okay. So let's just go back to the court. So they remove the sole medical authority and then give it to the boy's mother.
Yep.
Your child is 8 years old now?
He's currently 9.
Okay. After the mother gets sole authority, what happened after that?
She not only got sole medical authority after trial, the judge ruled in her favor for custody. I only have visitation. And so now the blessing in all this, Chaya, is I may have lost in court. However, I won with my son, because my son, I saved his life. He's a regular little boy now. And now that he's older, he's 9, he understands what was done to him. He understands that this was forced upon him. This wasn't something that he wanted. At one point, I was actually court ordered. I wasn't allowed to talk about his gender identity with him. A judge ordered me that. And so they wanted everybody else to talk to my son about this but me. But now my son, he's older. He's old enough to stand up for what he wants, more importantly, what he doesn't want. And he's awake now. And so
how did, mm-hmm.
No, go ahead.
How did your son go from being transitioned into being a girl to identifying regularly as a boy now? What did that happen
Just like
when
that.
you had the sole medical authority, or did that happen afterwards? Was it discussions with you?
No, it happened, if memory serves me right, if I recall correctly, it happened about the same time the sole medical was transferred over, and it wasn't like a gradual thing. It was a snap your fingers and now he's back to being a boy. And I had to have everybody, including the school, court ordered not to call him by anything other than his birth name using male pronouns. Now, you can imagine, one, the kind of trauma a 5-year-old goes through being socially transitioned in their school, but now they're back to being a boy. And so rightfully so, you had kids in his class going, wasn't your name Matthew? Weren't you or wasn't your name Ruby? Weren't you a girl? And so my son, just kind of plays it off and acts stupid about it and says, oh, you must just have me confused with somebody else. So the psychological toll on him, it's something that he's never going to forget.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot imagine. My heart goes out to him. It's like a bittersweet ending because, it's so great to hear that your son is living regularly as a boy now. Obviously there's some lingering trauma, but I'm hopeful that, with the guidance of his very smart dad, he's gonna live a happy life as a regular boy.
Yeah, I hope so too. He's using his voice, and my son is a absolute trooper. He's a warrior. He's a great kid, has a heart of gold, very intelligent. And I think part of that is because he had to grow up very early in life, faster than most kids. And he got to understand how the world works a little bit more than most kids his age. And it's both a blessing, but it's unfortunate because in part of that, I feel like he's lost his innocence. But if I had to do everything all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. I would have, I'd spent every dime of my retirement again. I'd drag it out 7 more years. I would do whatever it took to make sure that this wasn't going to happen to him.
He's very lucky to have you. You're a very devoted father, and you understand biology, which a lot of people these days don't. Let me ask you one last question before we
Sure.
wrap up. Do you think this would have happened if it was in, let's say, Florida?
No, not at all.
The New York courts are unfortunately overrun with woke activists. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. They are pushing a ideology in schools that ignores all logic, all science. None of this is based on medical proven anything with medical or any kind of scientific fact or evidence. It really is indoctrination. They're pushing an agenda, and these schools are teaching that they realize very early that they can control the voter of tomorrow by reaching the children today. And that's exactly what they're doing. They are brainwashing these kids.
And they're brainwashing them in the schools, and then they're using lawfare to kind of seal it into place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I spoke out against this, I was labeled a bigot. I was labeled a conservative. He must be a MAGA guy. And I'm like, no, none of that. This should be common sense, people. And so, in doing this and speaking out, I actually started an organization called Indoctrinate This Incorporated out of Florida. Go figure, to your point. And that's what we do. We raise awareness. We help gather resources to parents, help them speak at school board meetings. I've gotten several books that were targeting K through 3 with sexual identity, sexism, and sexual orientation. I got those books removed from my son's school district. We run a school watch, and this is what we do. I'm trying to turn this terrible nightmare into something positive and raise awareness so that it sparks true change, so none of this was done in vain.
It's incredible. So where can people find out more about that?
Yep. So indoctrinatethis.org. I also have a Give Send Go, givesendgo.com/indoctrinate this. 100% of your proceeds go toward keeping that site online, fighting this mission, helping other parents, and really just fighting this woke indoctrination of our children. It's the decay of society.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. God bless.